Thank you, Chancellor Khosla. Good morning. On behalf of myself and my colleagues on the Board of Regents, may I be amongst the first to say, congratulations, class of 2023. And I want to extend those congratulations as well to the families here today. The families by birth and the families by choice that have helped you all get to this day. In particular, congratulations to the first generation students here. You've made it through uncharted waters and now serve as a beacon for others to follow. I'd like to thank the faculty, staff, and leadership of the campus for successfully guiding another class through the University of California, San Diego. And I do hope, as the Chancellor said, that you all maintain strong ties to your alma mater. It is such an amazing institution. Built during the golden age of the post-World War II era, UC San Diego is recognized as one of the finest institutions of higher education, not only in this country, but in the world. This year, UC San Diego reached $1.64 billion in research funding. You're leaders in biotech in a region that is increasingly powerful in developing life-saving and life-changing treatments. UC San Diego was early and innovative in the fight against COVID. Not only did you lead the way in wastewater testing to determine the scope of COVID and its variants, researchers here at UCSD recently led advances in the treatment of brain dysfunctions associated with long COVID. Now that's tackling the problem at both ends. And thank you, and thanks to the Scripps Institution, UC San Diego is the only UC campus with its own fleet. I've attended more graduations here at UC San Diego than any other campus, and that's significantly due in part to what a special place this institution is. To help prepare my comments today, I crowdsourced the speech. I reached out to several folks who came to work for me right after college and asked them what I should share with you. And I was thinking about one of them in particular, a former employee for whom I had recently written a letter of recommendation. The recommendation form included a prompt asking what the most constructive feedback I had ever given that person. Now you need to know this is someone who is extremely talented, but who was also plagued by self-doubt and seemed to suffer from the imposter syndrome because his life's experience and his path through college felt incongruous with the positions he found himself holding. And it strikes me that that feedback I gave him may also apply to many of you. Look at the people in your lives who believe in you. If they've put their faith in you, then you should also have faith in yourself, especially as you move into new endeavors. Now, I know that sounds like something that's easy to say, but it's also something I know firsthand. In fact, the positions I've had, whether it was chairing the UC Board of Regents or being Speaker of the state legislature in California, are incredibly incongruous with the path that I started off in life. You see, my mother was born in Los Angeles in 1933. She was abandoned by her mother when she was 2 years old. She spent her youth first in Catholic boarding schools and then in foster care. Her opportunities at the end of high school were limited by her gender, her race, and her life circumstances. My father immigrated to this country in 1953 with a 6th grade education. It was in fact the highest level of education available in the small town he was from. But he had it easy comparatively. His sister was only allowed to go to school until the 3rd grade. Because in that time, in that place, why would a girl need to maximize her educational opportunities? I grew up in a working class community on the east side of Los Angeles. My mother worked in a carpet factory, and my father was a sheet metal worker by day and a cook by night until an industrial accident took away his ability to work. I came of age in a California whose population looked much like the population of today, but whose leadership and governing bodies decidedly did not. Politically, my community was divided up through race-based gerrymandering that prevented us from having a true choice in elections. True choices don't mean that your preferred candidate always has to win, or that they must look like you, but it means that you must have unfettered access to options. And many people in California, especially prior to the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, did not. It took years for Los Angeles City Council and the legislature to have Latino members at all, even given our population numbers. And I never saw elected office as a path for me because I didn't see anybody else like me in office. Growing up as a gay kid on the East Side, the only openly gay politician I had ever heard of was Harvey Milk, and he was assassinated. And that suggested other limits as well. I first got involved as an activist as a teenager, working to reject a second proposed prison in my community. At 16, I read and testified after reading my first environmental impact report. The experience and the connections that I made through that fight opened doors for me. In my 20s, as a labor organizer, I was appointed to the state's Managed Healthcare Improvement Task Force, which was created to root out structural barriers for people getting healthcare in California. Now, like many of my neighbors growing up, my family didn't have health insurance. Even after my mother went through a job retraining program and worked at a community-based clinic, my family never had health coverage. In fact, the first stable health coverage I ever got was when I got that job in the labor movement. Healthcare policy wasn't an area I had ever seen myself going into, but I found myself doing just that through two pandemics, first AIDS, advising both Presidents Clinton and Bush, and then COVID, and also during the Great Recession in between. When I became Speaker of the Assembly, I was the first gay speaker elected in the country, and I remember my election night to office was bittersweet. At the same time that 85% of the voters in my district sent me to represent them in Sacramento, they also voted by a slight majority to limit my constitutional right to marry. In Sacramento, there's a small book, a roster of all the members, and it gives vital information, so I made sure that we changed the listing under my marital status from single to constitutionally prohibited. I hope I can convey how different things were for folks of my generation. In the early part of my life, being gay was still actually illegal in California. Later, there was a state ballot initiative to ban gay people from teaching and ban others, make it illegal from others to report them if they knew that they were teaching. In the year 2000, around the time that some of you were born, I was fired from my job for having testified on my own time in favor of including LGBT people in the non-discrimination section of the California Education Code. When I was first coming out, the response, as with many men in my age group, was almost always including questions about AIDS. With all that as the context, I want you to know that being first mattered. Being visible as speaker mattered. But as I said at that time, that identity described me. It didn't define me. And I needed to go beyond that. And I was reminded of the contemplative by Rabbi Hillel, Im ayin ani li mi li, ushe'er ani la'atzmi ma'ani. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Put differently, it is the belief enshrined in our nation's motto, if not always seen in our nation's practices, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And that belief guided me in my efforts as speaker, and as I became speaker, California faced the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and we had the second highest unemployment rate in the country. My priority was helping all people access basic quality of life tools during this time. Working to help people who were losing their homes was one way. So we addressed that issue. But we also addressed the issue of affordability of higher education. So we created the Middle Class Scholarship, which so many of you have benefited from. And healthcare was another central point for us, because I saw the vast need of 7 million Californians who were uninsured at that point. And what I saw was reinforced by my own experiences. One day I was driving from Los Angeles here to San Diego, and my phone rang. It was the Obama White House asking if I would help persuade holdout members of Congress who were hesitant to support the Affordable Care Act. I gladly did. And knowing not that the ACA was not enough for California, I introduced legislation that created the first in the nation health exchange, covered California. And my colleagues and I passed that. Thanks to Covered California, we immediately got health care for 2 million more people. Health care we ensured was culturally competent and trans-inclusive. And we didn't stop there. 2 years later, after creating the exchange, I carried legislation to expand Medi-Cal eligibility to about 140% of the poverty line. That extended coverage for another 1.5 million people. So in those two acts, my colleagues and I decreased the uninsured population by half. Well, health care for all was ultimately the goal. We were able to achieve what was possible negotiating during a recession with a governor of the opposite party. Let me share another example. During the Great Recession, California was facing a $60 billion budget deficit out of a $120 billion budget. And we were frankly headed off the cliff. Through tough decisions that my colleague Senator Skinner and I and so many others made, and through tough choices by the voters, we increased revenues, changed the budget process in California, and put California back on track. But we didn't want to leave it at that. We wanted to find a way that California would be better prepared for the next major downturn. I deeply believed in the power of public policies to affect change and improve lives. I had seen the negative consequences in my community, and I knew if we worked together, we could do better and we could do good. To keep good programs and policies from being devastated, I carried the legislation creating California's Rainy Day Fund. And those were interesting negotiations. On the one hand, I had colleagues who believed strongly that new revenues should go to fix the harm of the cuts of the Great Recession. And other colleagues supported building reserves, but at the expense of an existing funding and needed programs, much like the national debate we've seen of late. I had to find a way forward. Being a strong progressive helped me. It gave Democrats the reassurance that I wasn't out to starve the things they cared about. And it intrigued Republicans that a Democrat was leading an effort to strong reserves and fiscal responsibility. The combination worked and the Rainy Day Fund passed. So what is it that I'm hoping that you take away from these examples? Just some thoughts that I hope will help you on your own path. First, consider that it's a path and not a tractor beam. Knowing what you want to do now doesn't mean that it is the only thing you will ever do. Leave yourself open to new experiences and areas of interest. And remember, paths and outcomes can sometimes be incongruous, but that should be a source of pride and not a cause for self-doubt. And if you're one of so many of us who are sitting there not really knowing what you want to do, that isn't a problem. It should serve as an inspiration for you to dig deep and find out for yourself. Next, when you have a goal, keep pushing towards that goal. Push again and push some more. And then when you think you've pushed so hard that it's all going to fall apart, take a pause, take a step back, and then nudge in the direction that you want to go, and then nudge a little more. Third, you don't have to be an elected official to bring about change. In fact, there are too many elected officials who don't concern themselves enough with bringing about change. Many people who were in the room when we shaped the policies on health care and education affordability and economic recovery were experts, not electeds. There are plenty of opportunities to be involved in the issues that interest you if you want to make a difference. Fourth, and perhaps in my mind most important, learn to negotiate. If there are two people in a room and one has deep policy knowledge and the other knows how to negotiate, the odds favor the negotiator. Together, though, these qualities make a powerful combination. And finally, work to get the best possible outcomes. All or nothing generally leads to nothing or nothing of importance. Just finding the lowest common denominator could lead to low and common decisions. Oh, and the main takeaway my former employees wanted me to share with you is take care of the little things. If you're gonna screw up on the big things. We all know that they're big and they're complicated. When you make mistakes on the little things, people think you're not paying attention. When you make mistakes on the big things, it's a chance to go back and try again. The important thing is that you take the risk of failure with big and complicated things, because that's part of how challenges get solved. And when you do screw up, you shake it off, get back at it. There will always be setbacks, but what matters is how you respond. You may have seen the story of an HBO intern who recently screwed up by sending an email instead of to a small group of people to every single person in the company. When word got out, people from around the world responded on Twitter to hashtag Dear Intern, telling of their own mistakes and how they learned from them. What I hope to leave you with by sharing that story and my own story is don't let impediments stop you. Don't let impediments define you. If you can't make it over a hurdle, decide that it's a limbo bar and go under. If you can't go over and go under, go around it. Find a way around it. But make contact so that as you make contact with that hurdle, you bring it down so it's not an impediment for others. If you look at the UC San Diego website, there's a message that says, Class of 2023, resilient and ready for the world. Resilient, absolutely. Though the impacts of COVID disrupted your experience, they should not define your existence, but they certainly did affect it. Ready for the world, I'm absolutely confident of it, because it is a different world than when you first applied to come and be a part of UCSD. There's an increasing amount of polarization in our society, and I believe that it is one of your greatest challenges to grapple with. Your class recognizes how bubbles of isolation briefly protected you during the early days of the pandemic. You have the opportunity going forward to recognize and pierce ideological bubbles that keep us apart. California prizes diversity, but it can't just be the reflexive diversity we normally think of. We shouldn't be afraid of people with differing opinions. We must embrace diversity of experience and perspective as well. How we approach each other matters. I don't believe people will follow someone who dismisses or disrespects them from the outset. But I do believe that you can lead people into spaces where they could have a conversation and potentially guide them along. But in that process, you must be open to. Don't go in with arrogance that you're always right, or go in inflexible to compromise. But you must know your own values. Know your core values. You can compromise on issues, but hold true to those values. And since I'm wearing a robe this late in the morning, that entitles me to either watch Netflix all day or quote the classics. So let me share one of my favorite quotes from the Greek mathematician, astronomer, and inventor Archimedes, who said, "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I will move the world." The education provided by UC San Diego has given you that lever. You must each find your own place to stand, and you can absolutely move the world. Let me also quote from one of the nation's founding documents. that said, in order to form a more perfect union. The beauty of the idea of America is that we're aspirational, always looking to be more perfect, never content with greatness, but dedicated to strive for better. And striving for better and changing the world is often a struggle. If governance, as in life, there will be setbacks. Seeing some of the challenges today, I'm reminded of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals." Be those dedicated individuals. Let me leave you with the words of suffragist Carrie Chapman Catt, words I see every day on a print that hangs in my office. To the wrongs that need resistance, to the rights that need assistance, to the future in the distance, commit yourself. Class of 2023, whatever path you are on and in all the things you commit yourself to, I hope you will have a future filled with joy. Congratulations, class of 2023.